This is Ghoulish, and I am Max Booth, a host, and you are listening to a brand new episode with the one and only Joe Lansdale. Ladies and gentlemen, I do believe I have made this statement numerous times, perhaps not on this podcast, but else, Joe Lansdale is my favorite writer of all time. He is the GOAT, as the kids say nowadays, meaning me. I am a baby. Joe Lansdale is a GOAT. I'm a baby. He is the fucking best. Any of his books are great. He has a bunch of new books coming out this year, in the year of 2020. He also just had his infamous trilogy, the DriveIn trilogy, come out as a big ol' omnibus. So I had him come on to talk about drive-ins a little bit. And, we kind of got way the fuck off the intended path, as you all about to find out right now. So enjoy my conversation with Lansdale.
I've never been asked a question I don't think I've answered unless I thought it was just unbelievably stupid. Like, what's your favorite color? It's green, by the way. But anyway, outside of that.
Let me cross that question off. Now I know. So I want to begin this podcast by addressing a rumor that is spreading about you recently. One that I made up and I haven't told anyone yet, but I'm going to. So back in the day when you wrote more Splatter Punk fiction, okay, is it true that you went by the pen name Joey Splat?
No. Nope, not true. Not true at all. And I've always taken that Splatter Punk thing with a kind of a grain of salt because I hate it. And it's not because some of the stories might not have fit that, but that because once you get that label on you, you're pretty well screwed. Because from then on, they feel like you've got to write a certain thing. And I never did that. Even then, I was already writing a variety of things. And my buddy, David Scow, made that up, the Splatter Punk thing, which was very clever. But I said, you know what? I just don't want this label. And I think some of the people that had that label, I think it confined them. And I think it even hurt careers. But, that's my take on it. They may feel totally different about it. And, there's even a Splatter Punk award that they give. And I get that. Nothing wrong with that. But I do think that if you allow yourself to be grouped into any one kind of fiction, that you can be nailed down forever. That's what happened with a lot of the people that were beat poets and beat writers. They couldn't get around that, and it happens with some, maybe not so much the science fiction new wave, but Splatter Punk, definitely. So yeah, I don't embrace it.
I think a similar thing has happened to those who embrace the Bizarro genre as well. They kind of get stuck in that corner. Yeah.
Well, what's so funny is that when the Bizarro genre came around, people thought it was new, but people have been doing that before. In fact, I was doing things like that. We called it absurdist, but it wasn't really a label for the fiction. It's just an absurdist story. I mean,
right.
If you look back on my early stuff, that's kind of where I sort of made my name, was writing these little clever shorts that were bizarre. They were off the wall. And I have no problem with Bizarro fiction. I think it's very fun and clever. But if you decide to put that label on you, then you're screwed. And I'll tell you another thing that people don't think about, especially when they're young, is that something that you love, you think you will always love, and you may not. And you may not love it in the same degree, or you may not love it consistently, or you may love it, but you need to get away from it once in a while and come back to it later. And if you identify too heavily, it's hard. I had a friend, and he's a fairly famous writer, a little less so now than he was, and I'm not going to say his name, but he embraced horror fiction just like, you know, I was writing it too. I love horror fiction. I love all of these things. But he said that's what he was, and that's all he was going to do. And I said, you know what, you might not want to say that, because when from looking at the careers of other writers and stuff, and Richard Matheson comes to mind, who, you know, did other things, but you can brand yourself so heavily that one day you may regret that, and he did. Although he did move somewhat outside of that genre, but it can nail you down to such an extent, be it crime fiction, horror fiction, Western fiction. And if somebody said, did you write a Western? The answer is yes. Did you write a historical? The answer is yes. Are you a Western writer? The answer is no, because I write other things too. I'm a writer that sometimes writes Western material or historical or horror or splatter, but I'm not, the label I find is too confining to sort of encapsulize my entire career, which has been since 1973, and actually started with nonfiction.
Yeah, I'm going to get back to that nonfiction. But I will say one of the biggest inspirations that I've had, and I know many other writers of my age have had, is the way that you have kind of shed sticking with just one genre. Like, I don't know what interview it was offhand, but I do recall reading an interview with you, and they asked, okay, well, what genre do you write? And you said, well, I write in the Joe Lansdale genre. And that's a really, really good thing to think about when someone else is trying to make a path as a writer, is you write in the Max Booth genre, you write in the Joe Lansdale genre. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, if you know, sometimes what I think happens too is that you're pushed by publishers, or you're pushed by your editor, and they're doing it out of logical reasons. It's not because they're malicious. They're just thinking in a commercial sense, because that's what they do. But they're telling you that if you do this and then you write another one like that, you will eventually build your reputation. And certainly if you have a great success with one, then you better turn around and write another one. You know, I remember when I wrote The Bottoms, which won the Edgar and the Herodotus and some other things and got a lot of attention. You know, the next novel I wrote was Zeppelin's West. And people said, oh my God, you're crazy. Well, in some ways, maybe I am. From a purely commercial standpoint, it wasn't the best choice, but I was making good money. And I've always felt like, as long as I can take care of my family, and I'm not doing this, say art is above everything. It's because it's not above everything. But what I was saying is that I want to do what I want to do because I'm better able or more capable to do it well if it's what I want to do. And I'm making enough money to take care of my family, and I'm getting to do what I want to write. And, you know, that's important to me. And I think too that a lot of people who use art as their defining reason for doing things often means it's an explanation for failure. You know, on the other hand, I'm not knocking art. I like to think I'm an artist. I like to think I have an artistic style. I have my own style. I'm out to do that. But the greatest art is the person that you make of yourself. That's the art. And if all you want to do is, you know, write those kind of stories, I have nothing against it. But don't complain to me about the fact that you're not selling them. I don't write for the audience, and I'm selling them. If I weren't selling them, then I might have something else to think about. But my look at it is this way: as long as I can write what I'm doing and make it as artistic as I feel like I can, mainly I just try to make it me, and it's selling and it's providing me with adequate funds. And over the years, it's actually provided me with far more than adequate funds. I've done quite well, unexpectedly, by the way. And I did it by doing what I want to do. And I'm not trying to suggest that everybody should do that. I'm just telling you why I did it, is that when I got up in the morning, I didn't want to think, God, I got to do this. I wanted to think, hot damn, I get to do this. And I'm still that way. When my feet hit the floor in the morning, I'm ready to go. And it's very rare that I have a day where I don't want to work. I've had some days where something's difficult, but that's not the same. Difficult is not the same as when I worked in the rose fields. It's not the same when I had a job digging ditches. It's not the same when I worked in roofing with my uncle. It's not the same as when I worked as, almost anything. I did, janitor, what have you, which relatively was easy, but comparatively, this is what I want to do. And I only do it about 3 hours a day. Any more than that, I get diminishing returns. So I get up in the morning, I do my work, and I don't want to say my stint, because it's not just getting it done. I love getting it done. It's like an orgasm in the morning and so I get in there and I do that. And then the rest of my day is great because I'm like a hero every day. I don't try to do entire days and work all day so I can say how hard I work, or that I try to do multiple drafts, because that doesn't work for me. And I say all this understanding that there's no absolute. Some books or stories come out a little different, require a little different approach. But most of mine is I get up in the morning, I write 3 to 5 pages a day, and frequently I'll get 10 or 15 if it comes, but it's still usually within those 3 hours. Once in a while, I'll write a little more in the afternoon or at night, but rarely. Or if I have 2 projects, I might start writing one at night, just to kind of play with it, but I consider that a toy. But my actual writing's usually about 3 hours a day, and it works for me.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said about it being almost like an orgasm in the morning, sometimes you have to play with it a little, feel it to do the thing you want to do.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, to me, it's the perfect life. That and martial arts have been my life since I was a child, really. I started trying to write comic books when I was 4 years old. I couldn't say that that's when I began my profession, but I can say that's something that I was driven to do, was to write and draw, but my drawing wasn't very good. I always said I was a genius artist at 4, but I was that same artist at 11 and at 25 and whatever. So in other words, I wasn't that good. But my writing improved, and I got better, and I felt more comfortable with that. And I felt that that's what I really wanted to do, was to shape words into stories.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I would make these tiny comic books and like make copies at my friend's house, and I would sell them on the bus. But eventually, I realized, oh, I cannot draw.
Yeah, the hands always were my problem. Drawing hands and feet.
Hands are
Everybody had like a
impossible.
little round hand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
They had round hands like Woody the Woodpecker and stuff. I can still doodle a little, but I don't have that great artistic talent.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that this is built out for you. I'm glad that you're doing well. I mean, those listening to this episode, they can't see what I'm seeing, but you will surrounded by stacks of cash. It's pretty cool. I mean, you just blew your nose.
Scrooge McDuck.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, what it is that I honestly believe that if just from a standpoint of wealth, I could have been far wealthier had I chosen to be just a horror writer at one point, although that would have faded too, probably because of genre change, or a crime writer, certainly. And that's all I did. And that's been good to me, because I tend to love to write crime stories, but I've also written other things. And I know I've had some publishers and editors and, even other writers that are friends of mine say, man, you since you can do that, why don't you just keep doing that? And if I feel like that's what I want to do, I do. If I do a contract and it's for crime novels, well, I approach it as crime novels, but I always approach it as my crime novels, meaning I may bring other elements into it, or that I may have other aspects to it. I know what drives it. If someone comes to me and says, I need a story, I'm doing an anthology on monsters, well, okay, that's a horror story. It could be done as a psychological story, but whatever I do, I try to bring something of me to it, because I love both what you think of as, I hate to use the term literature because it seems to demean everything else, but I like that. I like pulp, and I like the combination of those things. And so I just don't feel that I'm obligated to anybody other than myself. And I've always said I write like everybody I know is dead. So when I get through writing, I've written only for me. Now, when I finish, I hope other people like it, but I just don't care about the reader when I'm writing it. I care about the reader when I'm finished. And at that point in time, I hope they like it.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with why you've become so beloved, is because you haven't stuck with just the one genre, the one stick. We don't know what to expect from you. I mean, just this year alone, you've come out with a book, a road trip book, and also a book about a drive-in. and not just about a drive-in, but this episode.
So that's an old book, but yeah.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
talking
well,
about the new novel, the Call Duty Salesman. What is it called?
Oh, I'm sorry. More Better Deals. Yeah, you're right. That has
Yeah.
the drive-in and the pet cemetery in it. Yeah, and that's a tribute to James Cain. But what I tried to do was like screw it around a little bit, and I also took that whole concept of and Fitzgerald, you know, in The Great Gatsby, did it with the American Dream, that reaching for the green light where Gatsby's standing on the end of the dock, you know, and I took this idea that this is the American dream for this guy, is to have this drive-in and a pet cemetery, but things come with it that he doesn't expect. And so to me, it was great fun. I really had a great time writing that book, and it just wrote itself, you know.
I could tell.
I'd wanted for a long time to do a Kane type book. I did Freezer Burn, which is really more of a Southern Gothic version. This is more of a small town, small dreams version. And and it has other aspects. I don't want to give anything else away, but it's got more going on than just that particular drive. But yeah, and I also did the collection of Hap and Leonard stories, you know, this year, called Of Mice and Minestrone.
Oh yeah.
And I have this fall I have Fishing for Dinosaurs coming out, which is a collection of novellas that range from fantasy to crime to horror to Western, and they're all in one volume, you know. And so to me, it's like a dream come true, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And did the reprints of the Drive-In trilogy, did that come out this year? I think it did, correct? Or was it late last year?
Yeah, it came out this year. Yeah, it
Okay.
came out this year. Yeah, and then just at the end of last year, I had the last of the Ned the Seal anthologies, the Sky Done Ripped. So there's 3 of those books. I said anthologies, 3 series. And that's the third one, but I think it's like 18 years between the last one. But
Good God.
they all stand on their own, and I probably will combine them at some point and do them as one volume.
Yeah.
But I try to keep myself interested. And then that's not to mention I wrote a weird Western short story or long short story. I wrote a horror story for Fangoria. I mean, you know, I did a lot of different stuff. And the one I did for Fangoria, which kind of goes against Fangoria concept, is a mood story and not a overly graphic horror story. So, you know, that way you keep yourself interested, you keep yourself excited. And I'm sort of too, how much money do you need? I've got plenty, and I certainly want more to keep living and keep happy and be able to pay my bills. But you know, I get to do what I want, and I'm happy about that. I'm fortunate. I hope that continues.
I hope it does too, Joe. Well, should I say Joey Splat? No, I apologize. I won't
Joey
say that.
Splat, yeah.
I won't say that again. Please don't hit me. Okay. So I do want to talk a bit more about the drive-in books before we close this out. So beginning right off the bat with the intro to the original drive-in, you mentioned this all began because I believe it was Twilight Zone magazine, but please correct me if I'm wrong. You were invited to write a nonfiction piece about the history of drive-ins. Now I know this was a long time ago, but I'm curious. What about that piece do you recall? Like, can you school me on the history?
It's still in print. There's a book of mine called I think it's in the Best of Joe R. Lansdale. I could be wrong, but I believe it's in that. It's certainly been in a number of things, but and maybe reprinted again. When I wrote it, there was some revival of the drive-in, or looked like there was going to be, but it was a false revival. It didn't happen. But mainly what it was is they asked me if I had something I'd like to write about, and I believe I told Ted Klein that I'd like to do this, and so I wrote it. But I also has a fantasy element in there that came from a popcorn dream. Used to, if I ate my wife's greasy popcorn, I would have weird dreams. And so I got up and wrote that with the article. And I wrote about what drive-ins meant to be me, about my experiences at drive-ins. And then I added this fantasy element. And then an editor read that at Doubleday, a friend of mine, Pat Labruto. At that time, I had already sold one book to Pat, The Magic Wagon. And he encouraged me to write a novel. And I hated writing that novel more than any novel I've ever written. I wrote it in 2.5 months. It came very, very quickly. But the reason I hated it is that it really is so dark. It's funny as hell when you read it on the surface, but when you really think about it, it's very, very dark look at humanity. And and also I'd never done anything like that at that point. But when I finished it and I turned it in and it came back to me in the galleys, I know I was fearful to reread it. But when I reread it, I went, you know what? I like this. I think I got something here. But I don't think I knew that until it was actually in galleys and I was doing proofs. And it occurred to me then I do. But I think it was just so hard to do. And I was under so much pressure because I had other contracts and things like that and had been doing a little bit of ghost work. And so I wrote that one, and it was just as hard as it could be. But in 2.5 months, I wrote an entire book. And as soon as that was done, I had just a few days or a week off, and I wrote Cold in July right behind it in not much longer period of time either, which I enjoyed every word of it.
I love Cold in July quite a bit. Also,
Thank you.
pretty damn good movie adaptation too.
It is a real good movie. Yeah, yeah. No, I've been very fortunate in that, you know, most of the stuff of mine that's been done has been done really well. So I'm sure I'm ready for the big shoe to drop on a bad one. But, you know, I can't complain about Cold in July and Bubba and Incident on and Off a Mountain Road, which Don Coscarelli also directed as well as Bubba. And there was even a low budget Christmas with the Dead done, which is not anything to overly brag about in one way. But in another way, for what little money was available, and my son wrote the script, and a friend of mine directed it, it has a little bit of a cult following. And in fact, we think about maybe remaking it with a little bit more cash at some point. So we'll see.
Well, as I see on the Zoom, you have plenty of stacks of cash behind you, so I bet you could do it.
Those are called books. Books. On top of that, those are all foreign editions. Those are all Italian, French, Spanish, or whatever.
Hell yeah. Now that is cool. Wasn't Don attached to a drive-in adaptation at one point? Did that fall through?
He was at one point. He certainly was at one point. And it'll go years without any interest, and then someone will be very interested in it, and it'll look like it's going to happen. And Greg Nicotero once, you know, was interested in. Then he got into The Walking Dead, and then, you know, he didn't have time for it. But Paul Salmon way back. I'm trying to think that, and Don. I think those were really the ones. There's a little bit of interest in it right now, but I don't know whether it means anything yet. So we're waiting to see. But I really believe that it now a TV series would actually suit it better than I think a film.
Absolutely.
Because films were far better, activities for that sort of thing back then. But TV has changed so much from when I wrote the drive-in, which back then, if you had something like that on TV, like I remember seeing The Stand and thinking, that's pretty good for TV, because that's where TV was at that point in time. And so I'm hopeful that the new version they do of King's The Stand will be, you know, better. But it was limited, but now it's not limited. And in fact, it's better because it gives you more room to spread out and you don't have to leave everything out of it. And so, you know, I would love to see it done that way.
I think a TV show would be great because it has that mystery aspect to it, almost like Lost.
Yeah.
Because as we're about to talk about, we go beyond just one book. So how did the sequels come about?
Well, the second sequel came about because when I finished the first one, I told my editor, Pat Labruto, that I had more stuff I had to leave out because it just, you know, I didn't have room for it. And then the drive-in got enough attention. It didn't really sell all that well, and it was remaindered very, very quickly or destroyed or whatever. But it did well enough that he asked me to do another. And so I took that material I had left over and wrote the sequel. And then somebody talked to me, maybe, I don't think it was Pat, by that time I think maybe a new editor had come in, but talked to me about a third one, but I just didn't have anything and I didn't want to just write it to write it. So years later, I think it was 13 years later, I could be wrong. Somebody'd have to look up if they cared to know. But some years later, I really felt passionate about writing it, and I wrote it for Subterranean. one of the things that was weird is in the second one, I had a character named Bob. And when I wrote that first version, I forgot Bob. And so when it was redone for the complete, volume, I wrote in there, Bob died. And then I moved on. Because it fit the tone of those books anyway. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah, Bob died, And I think I had about 2 sentences to explain it. But, I'd lost interest in that character. And or I felt like I'd done all I wanted to do with that character. And the only one I truly had a great time writing, I like writing all of them, just like I told you, but those were hard for me. But the third one was a delight. And it's maybe not the one that most people are going to relate to, but I had more fun writing it than any of the 3.
That's good. I'm glad that you believe that finally you reached the book that was not a pain in the ass to get done.
I think the darkness of the first 2 is part of it. And I think that, I was venturing into water I had not yet ventured into, which I like to do. And there was a change coming over my work, and the drive-in actually was one of those changes. I think it was teaching me something that, I didn't know yet. And I was able then to write, I think, different kinds of short stories because of it. And I was already, somewhat had done short stories that geared me up for it. But when I finished it, it helped me do other stuff. And I think I've had those periods in my life. I think I'm going through one right now where I'm actually having another transformation, and I'm nearly 70 years old. I'm 69 this October, really.
Nice.
But, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I don't want to ever get complacent. I mean, I look at some writers and their first 5 to 10 years is it, 20, and then they're done. They're not doing anything original. They're just living off the old stuff. And I don't think there's a damn thing wrong with that, but I don't want to do that. I've got a long life, I hope. And so I'm wanting to keep doing things till I can't do them or don't want to do them, if that should ever happen. I don't want to end up like poor Dashiell Hammett the last 10 years of his life. It wasn't that he didn't want to write, it was that he couldn't, So that's
the ultimate hell.
Yeah. It's my idea of hell.
Yeah, not being able to write and wanting to write, that would be.
And wanting to. If you don't want to, then you're satisfied. I had an exchange on an email with Robert Silverberg, who's a great science fiction writer, and I asked him if he was going to write something else. And he said no. At 84, he felt like he had written all he needed to write, and I thought, okay, I get that. I mean, you get to a point to where either you're not interested in doing it anymore, you don't have the inclination, you're happy with what you've done. Then I think that's good. The sadness is if you want to do it and can't. And Bob was perfectly happy with where he was. And I've met a few writers like that, but I've also known a lot of others that they got caught up really in that whole thing about being identified as a certain kind of writer and were never able to get out of it. So it wore them out. And so they were no longer able to think outside of that particular arena. And so they were trapped in that arena for which they had no interest. It was like a rodeo and all the animals died, and so there was nothing they could do. They didn't know what to do. So I think that's sad. And I think that if I have one thing that's worked out for me is that I've tried to pay attention to the advice of other writers and the attention that they've given to their careers. Sometimes purely through observation. It's also by listening, and said, you know what, I'm going to try to avoid those pitfalls. I haven't avoided them all, but I've avoided the major ones, at least so far.
You've over the years, you've posted a lot of great writing advice on Facebook, and I recently left Facebook, so that's one of the downfalls of leaving that social media app is now I no longer see those in my feed. And I know you released like a tiny book of nonfiction not too long ago. I can't recall the name of it, but I was curious. Are you going to be planning to do
you must be talking about mysteries aren't what they used to be, I think is what it is.
Yes.
Miracles.
Yes. Miracles.
Aren't what they used to be.
It was a little tiny book. Yeah, it's a little. It's a cute tiny book.
Right. It had some essays, interviews, a couple of short stories, and things like that. It was a fun little book.
Yeah, but it's all possibly a larger writing craft book in the books.
I planning on doing it. My friend Brian Keene and my daughter Casey have really pushed me to do it, and they have, I think, gathered some of them up. And at some point, I hope that that happens. And I don't expect them to do it, but I think they've been very, very good about trying to get it done by using all of the things I've written and organizing them. And at some point, I may sit down and do it. The only reason I haven't done it is because I don't think that you need a lot of tips. You need enough to get you going. I'm more of an inspirational sort of guy than I am do this specifically, because I couldn't diagram a sentence for you. I have no idea how to do that. I didn't do it well in school, so I damn sure wouldn't do it now. But what I believe is I think I'm more of the Bradbury school. I'm kind of the Zen and the art of writing, which he wrote a book like that, and it's similar to what I think is that you read a lot, you write a lot, and at some point you start writing better, and then you keep trying to get better. And some people do, some people don't, but at least that's the ambition, is that you never really learn it. It's like martial arts, you never really learn it all. And as you age, certain things change in the way you see things, in your demeanor, in your experience. And so to be worth a damn, you have to be able to look at your own experience, both the positive and the negative, and look at it in a fictional sense or a non-fictional sense, and try to keep learning and developing. You have a lot of writers, like when I was young, I would say, well, I like their early stuff, I didn't like their later stuff. And then when I got older, I found that I liked their later stuff because I was old.
Yeah, we all
and
constantly
I was looking
changing.
at it from a different viewpoint. Yeah, they changed, but so did I. And so life experience teaches you something. Just aging teaches you something. And if you're lucky, you will age. A lot of young people, they have no idea they're going to age, or they start going, oh, the boomers. The boomers are, responsible for civil rights, responsible for anti-war, responsible for women's rights, gay rights. That didn't mean they always succeeded or that the whole generation was that way, but it meant that's where that came from, including the technology that we're using right now. The roots of it were there. The space program, that was the boomers. Every generation has its greatness and its weakness. So for them to look at this handful of jerks that they want to use as examples, or that they don't like the way that they think, then that's the same thing as looking back on the earlier generations. The greatest generation, as they call it, a lot of them came home and joined the KKK. So it's just like everything else. There's a mixture. Somebody came home and joined the KKK. Some people came home and were very much not good people. So, but most were. That's the point. Is that each generation has its strengths and its weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have a group of, say, you have a dozen people, all of them have different backgrounds and different motives. And it's crazy to assume all of them are going to be the same type of person. I understand what you mean completely.
Right. And you have these things, like I remember every few years somebody wants to ban, say, Vonnegut or Mark Twain or Harper Lee, because of language in them or because of what they're about. And the strange thing is that it's usually people on both sides have some, on the right or the left, will have some problem with it. And I think you can have a personal problem with it, although I don't always agree with those. But the idea of banning them, and now you have a whole group that say, we want to make sure that we always have this kind of language, that we always have these kind of characters. That's the same thing on the other side, and I tend to be on the left side for the most part, at least as far as social issues go. But I don't want to be geared. I can't use this language, because when I talked about racism, I'd use the language of the racist, because that's what I heard. And I wanted to make sure that you understood that racism was ugly and that it was like this, because I wasn't writing just to, tap dance and yodel. Sometimes I am, but other times I'm not. The Hap and Leonard novels, to me, are very anti-racist. They're about a lot of positive things, but to get there, I have to sometimes address ugly things in an ugly way, and even sometimes with humor. And we've gotten to where now we're getting to this point to where you know, and you know, and again, I don't want to do what people are doing, say the boomers. I don't want to do it to that generation because it's not the absolute. But there's a group that have no sense of humor anymore unless everything fits well within their view, or even if what that writer is doing is exactly what they want, if it's not the exact language they want it banned. And to me, that's just like the right wing and the left wing. If you go far enough left or right, you just meet in the same place. Anytime you start saying people can't do this because I'm offended, then that's bad, because a lot of times being offended is the most important thing. When I read Huckleberry Finn, it changed my life in many ways because, you know, I grew up in a racist society in the South, and here I am reading Huckleberry Finn, and a lot of people, oh, they use a word that offends me. Well, yeah, but when I saw it, those are the words I heard all the time, and the way Twain did it, he made me see things differently. The satire, the humor was funny in one way, but it bites deep. Because as Twain always said, all humor is about human suffering. When you really think about it, it's about, even if it's just gag humor about falling down, it's about things happening to people. And when I read To Kill a Mockingbird, I didn't think, oh my God, don't use that word. I thought, this is so powerful. And it changed the way a lot of people saw race. It made people aware that there was a racial problem, because a lot of people just assumed, you know, there was none. We go through that frequently. But then you start getting the people who want to say everything's offensive to them, or if it's offensive in their own way, then you should feel exactly the same. And what's really aggravating is when you do feel the same in many ways. You know, I'm for gay rights, I'm for civil rights, you know, so on and so on. But I shouldn't be restricted to having to do it your way to make those points, because then now you're being just as judgmental as the right wing. So it's a form of, you know, and I use this term loosely, but it's a form of Nazism on both sides. You know, I don't want to make that as heavy as true Nazism, but that's how it happens. That's where it leads to. And the thing is that you just decide you don't want to read something. That's fine. That's your choice. But to decide how people create, and I'm not just talking about me, I'm talking about anybody. I think that's bad, because if I don't want to read something stupid like the Turner Diaries, I don't read it. But sometimes I read something that I think's bad, so I'll understand why it's bad, and I don't have to take somebody's word for it. And sometimes I can tell within a few pages that, okay, not for me. But as far as like a word itself, a word is a word. It's the context that matters. It's the context. And sometimes when you write, you're trying to give that sense of reality, the sense of what you hear, and the sense of, so that you like to think that the reader is intelligent enough to know what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, kind of going with that, I mean, you could tell me dog shit smells all you want, but I'm not going to know about it until I smell that dog shit.
Right, right. And it's very much that way. You know, sometimes if you start developing these ideas where you have people at publishers who say, we can't have this because it's offensive, or we have to have this many white people, black people, you know, so have you, it becomes a doctrine and not, you know, no longer just a creative endeavor. And, you know, as for me, my characters are often gay and black and so on. You know, I don't think about that. I don't try to say, I'm going to plug this in. These are people I've known in my life. These are experiences that I've seen them have, experiences I've had in relationship to that. So that works its way into the fiction. But if I feel like I've got to do it, then it's artificial anyway. And I'm not really making the kind of point I want to make. So I don't feel obligated to do those things. I just naturally tend to do those things. And I watch some television shows, and I'm actually more offended because I feel like they just plug a character in so they can say, okay, we covered that. And I thought, no, we'll make that character about somebody, you know, plug them in, but make them real, or make their struggle something beyond just, you know, a platitude or so, you know. I want to see more gay characters in fiction. I want to see more gay characters in film, but I don't want them plugged in any more than they do with black people. They plug them in. Oh, we got a black face. We're done. That's not the same. You want black experiences from black creators as well, But a white person can mention a black person in the same way that a black person can mention a white person, because we all understand human beings in general, you know?
Yeah, I think what's most important is to have three-dimensional kill tools and not just don't stop at just the skin color. Tell me who this person is and make me want to read about them. Make
That's
me
true
want to
diversity. When you know something about those characters, and nobody should be limited to who can do what. I always find appropriation, this idea of they're appropriating culture, ridiculous. You know, and the way I do find that is that I've seen a number of black performance artists all with blonde hair. So if somebody wanted to say, my God, they're appropriating white culture because they have blonde hair, it's ridiculous. In the same way that if somebody wants to do a tribute to somebody because they wear dreadlocks, I don't stop and think, oh my God, how insulting to black culture. I think our cultures are blending. That's what we want. We want our cultures to understand one another. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're dictating that separation again, which is what we've already had, and that does not work. Separation is the worst. We want integration, not segregation. And that means in ideas. It means in cultural things, you know. I just think that sometimes that's so obvious to me, at least in my viewpoint. I saw this thing with Nancy Pelosi and a number of other people, and I loved the concept. They were all wearing the little cloth that was, I think, from Guyana with sort of like the Kente Kunte cloth, I think they called it. But it was such pandering. It was such pandering that it insulted me. And I think if I were a black person, I would be insulted, because I didn't think that it was so much looking at black culture and saying something nice about it. But what was funny is that I think it was the Black Caucus that suggested it. But then when they did it, they got in trouble with other black groups and leaders. And I think that, you know, the ones that gave them trouble were probably the ones that were right, because they were obviously pandering and trying to say, look how cool we are and how non-racist we are. And we need to work on stopping killing people because of their color, and stopping beating people because of their color, and pulling people over because of their color, instead of, you know, you wearing your scarf as some sort of photo op. And this comes from a guy that's a Democrat and a fan of Nancy Pelosi. But, you know, politicians, they're politicians, and they're put into positions that they sometimes feel obligated to perform. And, you know, I trust all politicians very little, you know, on either side. It's just that I think right now, for me, it's an obvious choice that, and you know, I'll say it, Trump bad. You know.
Oh, really?
Ultra conservative group bad. You know, they're doing horrible things.
Yeah.
But let's all try to use common sense too, because it'll get to the point to where creators are all nervous about creating or trying to figure out who they're insulting, and that can't be the way to true creativity.
I agree. I think anyone who reads the fiction you write, there's no way in hell they can doubt what type of politics you kind of have. I mean, it's really obvious. I mean, I kind of think,
you know, I have had one that wrote me and had all these little explanations about, do you know that this word is negative people? I thought, of course I do. That's why I used it. The point is, these are the negative people saying these things, and sometimes just casual people say these things.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to do is not present a utopian version of life, but something that, though it can be entertainment, that's, you know, I write to entertain people, to entertain myself first and then others. But I also like to, you know, slide in social and political issues. I've had so many people come to me, and I had one in Oklahoma that almost teared up. And he said, you know, I had all of these, and he had, you know, a lot of tattoos and stuff. He said, I had all these jailhouse tattoos, all this Aryan Nation stuff. I hated gays and all that. And he said, when I started reading your work, he said, once I got into it, and Happen Leonard's what he was actually referring to, I think, maybe the Bottoms, but he was saying that he began to see things differently. And he said, I was able to let go of the hate.
Wow.
And I thought, that was worth the whole damn thing right there, you know? And I get things from people like that say, you know, until I read your novels, I never actually thought about it, you know? And I think if I'm able to make people think about race in a positive way, or gay people in a positive way, then that made it worth it. And I would like for my books to become obsolete. I would like for it to be that it's no longer a question, that humanity gets beyond where I'm writing about, you know. And I remember when I first started writing those books in the late 80s, 90s, people would say, well, you know, those things are solved now. And certainly later when we had Obama as a president, those things are solved now, are solved now. And I said, I don't know how you can say that. I don't know how you can, see that. I mean, you would see, by that time you were starting to see videos of cops killing people. And then the next thing you know, that cop was released and nothing ever happened. And I'm not anti-cop, by the way. I believe we need a police force, but we damn sure need a better one than we have in a lot of places, or better cops that we have on some of the, particular forces in different places.
Yeah, maybe the system needs to be rethought a little bit.
It definitely does.
I would say, just sticking with this theme, like a good example that keeps coming to mind is The Night They Missed the Hill show. That's
Show.
Yeah, that story is a really graphic, but also I think it's really progressive at the same time. And if you read it,
I think so.
Yeah, if you read it just on one phase, it won't seem that way. But if you actually give it the time and attention, it's amazing.
Well, if you actually look at it and see how those characters are revealed, that's not somebody that I would think would want to be your hero.
Right.
And they certainly are not the brightest lights in the wood. But it's also about what I call, general or casual racism. And then they meet up with some people worse than they are, that absolutely are Aryan Nation and worse.
Absolutely.
And I tried to do that in such a way that I could write about the culture I grew up in, write about what I was angry about. Now, a lot of things about our culture, the Southern culture and where I live, are wonderful. But when I'm writing horror or I'm writing crime, that's not what I'm writing about. I'm writing about the negativity, because I love the South. I love East Texas, and I have so many great friends and people, and not everybody thinks like that. But I wanted to make sure that I shone the light on that. But it doesn't just have to be here; it could be anywhere. Those things aren't just in one section of the country. During the Civil War, the North did not rise up in self-righteous indignation at slavery. They, some did, but it took a while. They didn't even want black soldiers because they didn't think they were competent. And when the black soldiers finally were, enlisted and had the opportunity to prove themselves, they proved themselves just fine. And so to me, it's more intrinsic than we think. So it's built in so that a lot of white people don't see racism when they see it, even if they're looking right at it. It's sort of like if used to be when I was growing up, if black people committed a crime, they'd say, you see how black people are. And then you'd have the same crimes by white people. Instead of it looking at the whole race, it was just that guy. That guy committed the crime. But if a black person committed a crime, it was the entire race.
You still see
it's
that.
It's a narrow view. Yeah. And, I'm not looking to elevate any group as to being superior to another or better than another. But God damn it, we ought to have a fair field for people. And as Martin Luther King said, we should be basing it on character, not color. And character is something that, can vary from race to sex to whatever. But the idea that one group lacks character just because they're of the color of their skin or their sexual inclination is ridiculous. So now I've gone on a rant. Sorry.
Nope. When Joe Lansdale talks, you let him talk. That's my motto. But yeah, I think that's a good place to end this episode, I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, you have a shit ton of books coming out this year. I don't have a list in front of me. Do you want to go ahead and plug them again?
Well, I have, of course, More Better Deals. Excuse me. Right now is Mice and Minestrone, which is short stories about the early years of Hap and Leonard. And then More Better Deals is a standalone crime novel. And then I have that collection, Fishing for Dinosaurs, that's coming out this fall. And I'm working on a new novel now, and there's a new collection coming out before too long after that. And then there's sort of retrospectives of my career that are being done in special editions from SST publications. And I mean, I don't even remember. There's a lot of film options. They were supposed to film The Thicket in April, but when we had the pandemic, it got canceled. I hope that it gets picked up again. We'll see.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Joe, for coming on. This was a great episode. Thank you for listening to Ghoulish. If you liked today's episode, why don't you go and rate and review us on iTunes. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/PMM Publishing. My new novel, Touch the Night, is out right now, so if you like books about small towns and corrupt police and spooky demon shit, well, you better go get that book. Also go pick up The Girl on the Video by Michael David Wilson, and you can pre-order the new novella from Paul Michael and Wilson titled Standalone over at perpetualpublishing.com. That'll do it. Don't miss these books. Don't miss them.
Live spooky, die spooky.